Well, good morning, and nice to be with you all. Today, we're going to talk about the needed skills for Autism Spectrum students and college. As I'm sure you who are watching know, students with ASD disabilities are entering college but may struggle in college not because of their potential or academic prowess, but because they face numerous social, behavioral obstacles in and out of the classroom. We have with us today Dr. Sally Burton Hoyle, who is an expert on helping these young people, and I am in awe of her. She's given me a list of the skills that these young people must accomplish for college, and Sally, I'm hoping you'll go over them with us. Can I now? Yeah. It is. Oh, I was going to give you a flourish of an introduction.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But and the flourish is that we should all welcome you, Dr. Sally. It's a great pleasure to have you here. And now, can you plunge into the skills?
Yes, and hopefully Chris can put that list up of some of the skills that are necessary. And these are the sorts of things that many times at the high school level, a special education teacher might work on with an individual on the spectrum, or they might ask parents to work on, and sometimes it's seen as like a light, fluffy kind of skill, and it isn't intended to. And yet, if you don't do these things when you are either in a college dorm and attending class, or just attending class and being a commuter student and living at home, if you're not able to do these things, then success is really not going to happen. And always one of my first things that when a student says, when I always say, do you keep a planner? Do you keep Google Calendar? How do you keep track of things? And if they say, and they point to their head and they say, I don't need to, it's all up here, then I always go, uh-oh, because then that absolutely is trouble. And sometimes parents think that if they used planners and schedules and picture schedules and all that stuff when they were little, that they didn't need it as they got older, and you need it even more. And I think all of us use planners and things like that. So being able to write down and meticulously follow what it is your schedule is going to be, raising your hand in class, because, neurologically, people on the spectrum, if the teacher is talking, they are not, it's not an easy skill to scan the room, so they might just think, well, the professor's having a conversation with me. Therefore, then they dominate the class conversation, and, they don't know the proper etiquette of raising your hand and waiting till you're called on. Students need to be able to explain what their needs are, which kind of, my thing is self-disclosure, and as early as is appropriate, and using age-appropriate language. Families need to make sure their student is able to say, yes, I have autism, and my specific needs are such and such, because otherwise you're not going to get accommodation. Waking up is an issue. Students need to be able to wake up to an alarm, and as early as possible, parents need to make their children, wake up from an alarm, so it's not, a whole big power struggle, and then them getting into college and saying they need somebody to come and do that. For those individuals that have sensory issues, sometimes the personal hygiene becomes an issue, and there they are on their own, and maybe they took a shower because mom and dad made them, a couple times a week, and then they get into college and it's pretty ripe, and we're having to, kind of escort them back to their dorm and, kind of facilitating them getting their showers. So that whole, one young man who smelled very badly, and I told him, I said, do you shower every day? Do you wash your clothes? And he said, no, I don't need to, because the deodorant I use is extra strength. And, we all laughed, and nothing was that extra strength, because you still need to have clean clothes and all that sort of thing. students need to be able to pinpoint what they need help with. So if they go into office hours to a professor, they need to be able to say, I need help with this particular item, and not just sit there and fumble through, all their papers. They've got to be able to develop relationships with their professors, and that is attending to office hours and arranging meetings and things like that. The medication, being reliable and dependable with administering your own medication is something that is critical. And there have been some people in our program that we've had to send home because they didn't take their medication and it became dangerous. And, we can remind and all that sort of thing, but we can't physically do that. So you need to get your children in the situation, if they're taking medication, that they can do that on their own. And then the computer last, are they able to turn it off at night in order to sleep? We have some students that they would keep on it, and it'd be 4 or 5 in the morning, and maybe then they'd fall asleep, and then they'd oversleep, and they'd miss their class, and it became a very, very bad pattern. I know in our college supports program that we collect data, and if they've overslept and or missed class or sleeping in class, we sometimes have them turn in the computer at 5 o'clock to me, and then they can pick it up the next morning. And then there's plenty of places on campus they can use a computer.
Sally,
anyway,
that's what strikes me about what you're saying is, how does that feed into the present day culture? Because a lot of these things you've listed are problems for all young students.
Right.
They're not big at keeping themselves picked up. They're not big at planning their list. How much do you think those students are affected by the culture they're surrounded by?
Well, I think that they're used to, it might go a bit at home, and then mom steps in and says, all right, together we're going to clean the room and we're going to get organized that way and get in the shower and that kind of stuff. But in college, they don't typically have anybody to do that. And whereas a typical kid might have a friend say to them, gosh, dude, you stink, go take a shower. If these are kids that don't have friends, they're just going to repel people who are just going to say, oh, wow, that guy smells, and they're going to talk about him, but not develop relationships.
That brings up the question of friends. Are they able to make friends with the mainstream students?
I think.
How does that work?
I'm going to interrupt for just a second.
Sure.
I wonder if you could look at this list and kind of relate to, did Temple have any of these problems in college?
Absolutely. In first place, the deodorant was a battle I had with her when she was 14, and she would not use a deodorant. And she didn't understand that this made it difficult for her in school to make friends. She feels that the problem never came up till she came to have a job in Arizona, and the boss of the job put a jar of deodorant in front of her and said, Temple, your pits stink.
Yeah.
Temple would not accept it from me.
Yeah. Well, because he was the authority, he was her boss, and so he had, he had presence to her, and so it can take that sort of situation for anybody, typical or neuro, or not, to learn.
See, some of this overlaps with the whole. With all the kids, talk about mess. I have 5 grandsons, and they have told me about the problem of living with other students when they had a rented house, something like that. Who left the mess in the kitchen? Who left the mess in the bathroom? Who doesn't pick up anything? It's not an unusual problem.
No, it's not. And then eventually, just getting my 3rd son out of college, it's not, then at some point, they're disgusted with it. And then they say, okay, mom, or our parents are coming for parents' weekend. And so then they pull together because they have relationships with people. And then they come together and get the apartment cleaned. I think the key is relationships.
Well, that's what, let's get back to that. The question of friends. and relationships, and how does that work, and how do you help them make that work?
Well, how in our program we make it work is that those individuals that don't have any support might just be very, very lonely and not engage in anybody. And we hear reports from, somebody who lives across the country, and the parents drop them off and they're in their dorm all the time. And they never leave other than to go to class, and they're there, every night, every weekend, even holidays with some kids. So what in our program, how we facilitate development of friendships is by finding common interests and finding mentors, and a faculty mentor that is interested in their same interest in geology, or what is the Manhattan Project. One of our students is fascinated with the Manhattan Project, and so I found one of the professors at our university who had done his dissertation at MIT on the Manhattan Project. So it's like it's finding people then that he can develop relationships with them, and then friends. Are there clubs? Are there other sorts of things where then it isn't just a matter of finding a club that they're interested in? There's Quidditch Club. We've got some people that are Harry Potter nuts that play Quidditch, which is really like lacrosse, only with brooms. They beat each other with brooms. It's kind of, but it's on a lot of different college campuses, and it's from the Harry Potter series. But so they recreated that. So there are some kids who go, and we have staff support with them to be kind of with them. And then all the staff support for our students are also college students, so they kind of blend in. So they can kind of facilitate, hey, why don't you go over and say this, or why don't you do that? We have somebody who wanted to join a fraternity, and so we had staff support with them go to the rush party just to make certain for his safety, and that people didn't, just try to get him drunk and rob him or things like that.
Well, that's what I was thinking about. It's a two-way street.
Right.
What about the mainstream kids?
Yeah.
Do they step forward?
In every situation, they have stepped forward. I go to and meet with every single faculty of our students in our program and say, you're going to have so-and-so in your class, and the student has developed a letter to the professor, and sometimes they go with me to meet the professor. And one of the things we arrange is a way for that student to, at the beginning of the semester, when everybody does this, it's like, tell me about yourself, that we have something prepared that student then just says, I'm Tony, and I do have autism, so working in groups is going to be hard for me. Oh my gosh, that's all it takes. And then everybody has jumped in, and I've not in 4 years had anybody that when the professor knew the student had autism, and when the peers knew they had autism, that they didn't go above and beyond to try to support them. But then that's where that self-disclosure is a critical skill that families need to start in on very early, and make sure everybody's comfortable with it and not.
And you use the word comfort, because I'm so glad to hear that, because I have felt that if we got the mainstream to understand better what's going on with autism, everybody's nervous system would quiet down. That includes not just the one on the autism spectrum, it includes the mainstream people. Once they understand,
they do, and
then they step forward.
And then, if they have legal accommodations as well, then we work that out. For instance, when we meet with the professor, somebody who likes to doodle, we tell the professor that. The professor knows that, then he doesn't yell at the kid for, like, why aren't you paying attention? If somebody, when they get anxious, need to pace, if the professor knows that, then he's going to be fine with it. Or if somebody needs to get up and go use the restroom when they're getting anxious, then, it's all about the knowledge, just like you said, for when the mainstream know that. And then what we've had is faculty, it's a small enough university, too, that they all recommend one another, make sure he takes this class next, or make sure, and then, I talked with my buddy so-and-so, he should have this person because that guy also loves trains like this person. A fascinating situation we had was last fall, we had a faculty member that went through the process, and when we went in to have a meeting with him, he said, I found out I had autism. You know, he was a math professor. And so it was together, they were kind of bonded over that. So that is the good thing to me about so many people being diagnosed on the autism spectrum, is that it makes it kind of a more known factor. So, I mean, that has been something, one simple accommodation in group work, because there's a lot of group activities in college where you sit together in a group in a class. And the neurological movement disorders of autism may stand in the way of that, for starters. And so one young man, when they did the group, he didn't know how to physically just like turn his chair so that he was with some other peers. He didn't do that, and therefore he missed the entire assignment because he wasn't in a group and the class was big enough that she didn't notice it. And so there was a really easy fix to that, and that's when he came in the program and staff was there, the staff, who'd be another college student, would just push his chair over. Just move the chair over so that he was physically in a group. That's all it took. Because he didn't have, you know, we all know the basic socialization, communication deficits in autism. He wasn't going to say, oh, I'm not in a group. Somebody help me, get me in a group. He wasn't going to do that. So he did it physically. Once he was in the group, then he could participate.
But Sally, what strikes me about all that you're doing is that you are, in a sense, not just teaching the young person on the spectrum, you're teaching everybody.
Right.
And that's terribly important, because I feel that our future lies with the young people.
Right.
And the more they've been brought into the situation, the more they can help.
Right.
The more there is less of a quote-unquote situation.
The ripple effect from it is amazing. From the students going home, the typical students that go home and tell their mom, you know, we've got these kids with autism in our classes, and then people change their perception. They say things like, I didn't realize they could go to college, and then it just on and on and on. The effects of that are amazing, and it's such a great thing to be a part of.
Well, now, do you ever have students with obsessions that could be dangerous or even illegal?
Yes, and we had a student, luckily, a student with autism, and I point that out because even though it's all autism spectrum disorders, there might be differences between Aspergers and autism. This young man had autism, and he went home for Christmas and he said, Mom, I'm having trouble leaving my room. And she said, why is that? And he said, well, because I want to look at the little kids on the computer. And she became very alarmed, and she met with me, and we got him with a psychiatrist, and they began addressing this. Now, I think, again, kind of goes back to relationships, and he hadn't yet, this was in the first semester, he hadn't made any kinds of connections outside of our support, because people need more than just people that are paid to be there with them.
I think of Temple with this kind of struggle. She found that if she wanted help and she needed statistics from the other students for her project, she found she couldn't get that from the other students until she took an interest in their project.
Right. That's right. And that's one of those things where he was motivated at that point, but his loneliness and, staying in his dorm room could have ended up in a very dangerous sort of situation. Both his parents were attorneys, and they were like, oh my gosh, they were scared to death, and they got right on it. So I don't know, other dangerous sorts of things might happen. So we kind of, we're on alert for that. We work closely. We have a clinical director who's a clinical psychologist. We have a psychiatrist that any of the kids that either if they're from a long distance away, they might do Skype mental health counseling with their psychiatrist, or there's a psychiatrist in town that a couple of the individuals do see. So we're quick to call in that clinical support when it gets beyond just basic daily living kinds of issues.
Yeah. Well, now wait a minute. I had another Let me get to the next page here. I had another. Oh, I know. Here's what I wanted to talk about. How do you balance a realistic outlook with what's possible? That's it. Not only in college, but it will lead on to how are these young people going to move into the workforce? And with it goes the question about what do you do if you have a professor who doesn't like a student,
Right.
and is uncooperative.
Right, and that has happened. We know that that's happened from people that prior to it went back to self-disclosure. They didn't self-disclose, and so it just would seem to the professor as if they were just rude. And so kind of misperception, but also the fault of the individual. And I have to say they need to grow up with the comfort level of being, of being on the spectrum and being proud of it and being able to embrace it. And that takes everybody to do that. So if you grow up that way, and then you go to college and you share with your professor, I do have Asperger's, I'm sorry, sometimes I might do such and such. I don't mean to be rude, but sometimes I don't know what to say or something like that. I mean, there are scripts that people can develop that they can use with the professor. But again, it takes early on acknowledgement of that I do have a social deficit.
Well, that's the key word, is acknowledge, because do you find that you meet students who look upon what you're suggesting for guidance as a chore?
Yes.
They do? And do they avoid you? What happens?
Yes, and it's one of those things. I've had several interviews with young individuals. Generally, it's 18 in our program, and I think 13 of them were boys. And then there were some other people that came to talk to me about maybe being in the program. And as we talked about some of the things that were difficult, and they would just argue with it, and wanting to blame other people and blame society and all that sort of thing. And and of course it wasn't their Asperger's or autism, it was everybody else's fault.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it becomes a real clinical issue. And I don't really know if you're going to argue with me about, well, like I said, taking your medication. If you're going to argue with me about that and then it becomes dangerous, then you need to go home. You need to go home and have your parents looking out for you.
So you're that direct with them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We are. We kind of do a midterm review with the student and the family, and kind of alert them at that point to, I don't know if this is going to work. And we don't want perfect people at all. We have very people with that have come from all different kinds of backgrounds, but there's got to be some sort of willingness to advance.
Sally?
Yes.
I have some questions from Diana.
Okay.
And she wants to know, is this a program for kids living on campus? You have to live on campus to be involved in this program.
No, it's for people that are commuters, and people are living in the dorms as well.
Okay. And then another question, are the mentors that meet with the students daily, do they meet with the students daily to be sure classes and assignments are organized?
Oh yes, their schedule, the mentors that are the college students or grad students, their schedule is what the student's schedule is. The college student in the college support program. Additionally, we have trained mentors that run study table. We have study table 2 times a day, 7 days a week, and those people are and that's our staff that does that. So they have people that are with them constantly that go to their dorm and help them be organized, or else meet them at the drop-off point, or when they get off the bus, or their mom drops them, or if they themselves drive. So it's all about the organization. It's not just they do attend class with them. And the reason why is because for every single time that a parent has said they're not going to need that, they're not going to need that. They never had that in high school. But when you get into college, that's a whole different thing. And the syllabus is kind of the law of the land. But if a professor, for instance, says, because of Martin Luther King Day, I'm going to put the test off another week. And if your auditory processing misses that, then you are in a world of hurt. So we sometimes, if the person says, I want to try it by myself, we wean them kind of off of us, and then we do checks with them. There's a template, for instance, that if somebody says, I want to try it without anybody sitting with me, okay, and so we meet with them after class. What was the topic today? What did you cover? What's your next assignment? Were there changes to the syllabus? When's your next quiz? And if they can answer all those things, and then of course we double check, with other students and or the professor, and that's right, then we do begin. But once midterms roll around, the anxiety level goes way, way up, and then anxiety level, we all know that skills diminish when there's higher anxiety. So, but the goal is we're working towards people just having like a daily check-in with somebody. But so far we're not there yet with anybody. We're spending quite a bit of time, 20-some hours a week generally, and that's not counting study tables and other things.
Okay, and you have clubs. I'm sorry, Eustacia. Let me get got another question here.
Yes, another question, yes.
Is there a club specifically for the students that you mentor?
No. In honoring the disability culture, we have a once-a-week get-together because it's fun to be, kind of with the same people in the program, and it's usually like there we go, there's a picture, like a 4 to 6 on a Friday afternoon. With the idea that for those kids living in the dorm, there are so many activities, movies, and, like here in Michigan, this last winter was horrible, like it was a lot of places. And I know one Friday night, we all met for pizza or tacos or something, and then they were having a beach party thing the student center was holding. So, it was like there's lots of fun stuff on campus. We don't want to be their everything. We want to facilitate them being in clubs of interest, but we also want them to know that they've got each other as well.
Well, here's a topic that's been weighing on my mind, and that's the cost of all this. Does that fall to the parents, to the state?
The program that we have, the College Supports Program, students pay their regular tuition, and then it's between $5,000 and $7,000 a semester, and we just do a semester contract at a time. And you know what? There are places that are $40,000 a year. There are places, Alliance, what is it? Defiance College, I know in Ohio, they're a flat $11,000 a semester. So I don't know if I'm wrong about that. Somebody can certainly correct me, but I know we were just looking that up. So then there's the college life experience that is dormitory and social skills and eating and buying your groceries. That's something like $40,000 a year, but that doesn't touch college. That has nothing to do with college. Where this is, I'm faculty, in my department, and so we're right in the midst of it as a part of the university. We're not a separate part. And you know what? It's like last year we lost money because, again, our intake process has gotten kind of more detailed. We had people, parents, and saying like, well, my child isn't going to need very much support, when in reality they did need a lot of support, and they needed. We're paying mentors, a good salary to provide this kind of support. They're graduate students, all of them. So it costs money. So no money, we have to break even. You know, no money is made on this. I certainly make no money from
well,
it.
I know that, but what I'm thinking of is that means this is available to families with a lot of money.
Yes, it's you know, I want to tell you that Washington, D.C., their vocational rehab services is paying for one young man. They're paying all his college supports. They're paying for all that because he got a whatever GPA in high school. He came from a public high school in Washington, D.C., and they're paying for it. We've got some individuals that are Medicaid, they get Medicaid. They're in the community mental health system. And there's a line item called community living services that money is being accessed by one family. Families that do college plans, that money in college plans can pay for this. Now, FAFSA, which is the federal aid, does not. It will not pay for that. But parents could get a parent loan and pay for it with that. So, I mean, there's ways of doing it. It is expensive. It is expensive. And but if you're not sure, when I meet with families, I always ask them, I give them that checklist that we talked about earlier about using a planner and all that kind of stuff. And I always recommend community college. Always. I always say, have you tried community college? Why don't you start with that? We have a couple of students that finished their whole program at a community college. And so they came in and they're 23 or something, and it took them a long time to get through an associate's degree program. So, but they got half of their college done at a real reasonable price, and then just a couple of years of higher education at the college level.
Question?
Yes, go ahead.
Is this this is from Tanny, is this an isolated experimental program, or do you see it being spread throughout the universities? And I guess how would you find out where they're located? Is there someone that keeps track of it?
I would contact it. They're not very many, and I know we're going into year 5. I think year 4, year 5. And other places have had them. Penn State had one, but it was free, but it was volunteer. And in talking with me, they said, well, it kind of doesn't work when you have people that are volunteering, because they don't have to do it. They're not getting paid to do it. I would call every office, every university has to have a disability office, because they're who make sure that accommodations are followed through Section 504 of the Rehab Act. So every university has a disability resource center or a disability office. And I would call there and say, do you have specific services for people with autism? And they might say, yes, we have them. We have accommodations. Our program is way beyond accommodations, because there are no accommodations that say, we're going to help you keep your dorm room organized. There's no accommodations that say, we're going to set up visual schedules and do video modeling with you so that you learn how to approach people in the cafeteria to have a conversation. Those are not accommodations. Those are services and supports. So make sure that you ask them. But I'm telling you, there are more places that are doing this, and make sure that they have. I developed our master's program in Autism Spectrum disorders. My thing was the whole university has to be autism friendly. So the admissions office, the registrars, the bookstore, all the people that work in dorms, all the RAs, people that work in food service, all of them get yearly training in autism, and the whole understanding that people with autism are here on campus, and that's what it takes, because if they don't. Because we all know this, if we have loved ones on the spectrum, all it takes is one bad experience, okay? So you've got somebody and they are very specific about what foods they want. If they get into it with the person in charge of food services, they could be seen as being dangerous and, have to go to the dean of students that recommends expulsion. Those things truly do happen. One young man that was just about to get kicked out of college because the teacher felt threatened by him. And what it was he dominated class conversation, and when other people would try to talk and she would call on other people, he would say they were stupid and dumb and all this kind of stuff. And I went in to collect data on him before we met to decide about this guy. And he, in an hour and 10-minute children's literature class, interrupted 81 times. And it was just like the teacher was a nervous wreck. This other students were just, it was hostile. I mean, it was a very bad situation. And yet, so then he came into our program, so I mean, it's one of those things where if people feel threatened, they can say you're out of here, and universities will do that. So,
is there any way? Because you see, what you've done is to develop an advanced program, and it's marvelous. Is there any way to get some of the same benefit at a reduced level that would be more affordable and for other families, and that will not burden a family with an accumulation of debt that they may not be able to climb out of?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to say, because
I don't know either. I just thought I'd throw it on the table.
Yeah.
Because there's a great deal in what you're saying that you can teach other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems as though there ought to be a less advanced program, but maybe more affordable for some families.
Well, take it easy. I mean, this is a journey, and take one class. Go to community college and take one class, and then build up and take a second class and learn that way. Okay, that makes sense. So I mean, because you have to be able to navigate certain kinds of things, or get the support. So.
Well, see, that brings up the next question of, if after you've gone through this incredible program, the expectation is that you will have a job that will use your academic expertise.
Right, that's right.
I don't know. The job market is hard. Again, I think of my 5 grandsons, and I know the number of letters of application they put out that are not even answered, not even recognized.
Oh, I know.
I don't know how we're going to get through that hurdle.
Now, for people that are in technical fields, they'll
be better off.
Well, there's a headhunter in the Detroit area, and like the Big 3 and NASA and various places like that contact him, and they say, we need somebody that can do this or this or this on a technical level. We need an aeronautical engineering major. So he only works with people that have their degree, but once you have your degree, this guy can work with you, and what he does is gets all the accommodations. So if somebody needs to work from home, if somebody needs to have an office at the end of the hall and not ever go to the workers' lounge or any of that sort of thing, then he's able to work that out. If their skills, then so he matches up the skills of the person to the needs of the company. So rather than going and pushing people with autism, he kind of does it that way. And so he's been very successful. So we're to the point where we're going to have people graduating, and we've got career fairs, an autism career fair kind of set up based on the majors. We've got 2 people that are animation and gaming majors. We've got somebody else that's a creative writing, children. He's written 4 books and gotten them self-published, and they for sale on Amazon. So the career fair is going to be a mini version kind of based on what their skills and strengths are, and we're going to invite employers in those areas to come and meet them. And we'll open it up to all of campus too, because I'm sure there's lots of.
Well, yes, I think there are a lot of the mainstream kids who need exactly the same thing.
Right.
This brings up the question also of expertise. We need, and I'm thinking at the moment also, it's a step down. But what about blue collar expertise? What about electricians and carpenters, these are skills that cannot be outsourced?
if there's an interest there. That's the thing, is that we have a College of Technology that people are getting a degree in construction management and some things like that have to do with a lot of these sorts of things. And so if a person's interest is there, then it can work. If the interest is not there, it's never going to work anyway. So, I mean, I think you have to start with what would the person like, and then if there's an apprentice program, kind of going back to finding somebody who has a good understanding of that.
Well, now, this is also a problem that applies to the mainstream culture. We have a whole generation of young people who are bored with work.
Mm-hmm.
They want to do what they want to do. Well, there aren't enough of those jobs to go around. And I'm thinking of two people, a super who told me that his son was driving him crazy because of his laziness, and a store manager who said, my son is working here now and he drives me crazy. He's lazy. He won't do the work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have a generation that we've raised to feel that they're somehow fated to do exactly what they want.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, I just know.
I guess what I'm trying to get to is, how do parents, this part of this falls to the parents.
Right. Oh, I think a majority of it does, in that if you're not in an interest, that something that you could do your whole life and not even think of it as work, and you've got to figure out what that is early, and you've got to support that with the idea that at the age of such and such, they need to be making some sort of income. So I think it's a matter of resources, and I'm not wealthy, so my kids all knew that they were going to have to, and doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. My children are not trust fund kids, so they're poor. Unless they're working, they have no money.
Well, and I keep talking about those 5 grandsons. They all work very hard.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think some of this lies with the parents,
mm-hmm.
Who you can't do everything for the parents.
No.
And how realistic is their view of their children?
Right. Exactly. And a job choice can't be the parent's choice. It's got to be what the individual has done, and then we all have to be very clever in figuring out if you've been on cross-country teams and you even ran cross-country in college, that doesn't necessarily transfer to being a coach. So, I mean, it's like then you have to figure out what are the things you can do with those things that you are most interested in. And the only way that we've been able socially to make some gains with some individuals is to say, you know what, if you do that, you will not be able to keep a job. You will get fired if you were to say that to, a boss. You can't say, I need more time. You can't ask for an extended time to end in your final or something like that, because in the real world, your boss might get tired of that. You might get it once, and then he might say, look, we need to find somebody else to take the place. So,
and it won't be hard to replace them.
No, right. That's right.
So there's a realistic view in there.
Right.
So Sally, can you address the mental health issues? Because I'm sure that's, and I think that's very unusual that you would kind of deal with that too in your program, although absolutely necessary. So
right. Yeah. Well, in our intake that we have school personnel. We look at, we have them write letters, and we have checklists and things like that for them to fill out about the individual. And then we also ask for, their last psychological evaluation, or if they're seeing a psychiatrist, social worker, or something like that, we want a letter from them about how they think that this person might do, living in a dorm, or going, dealing with the pressures of college classes and their recommendations. So we pay very close attention to that. And I think that in our first year or two, we were missing that. And I think that's where we got into people with way more mental illness issues. A girl that would not shower. And here's the deal: is that with our students, they have an arrangement that our mentor might go to their depending on the person, might go knock on their dorm room and say, hey, let's go to class. When some, they might meet them in front of the building or in front of the classroom or something like that and go in together. But if you're at none of those places and I have no word for you, then we have to do wellness checks, and that means the campus police have to go in your dorm room and see if you're okay. And this young lady that we had to, you know, ask to not come back, we had to do that several times, and it was partially a computer problem where she was on, you know, on the computer late at night, and then she'd take her Ambien, which she was supposed to take at 9 at night. She would take it 4 in the morning or something like that. So the mental health issue means that people need to be very, very realistic about what kind of support, and then either go to some people right in Ann Arbor or go to, you know, a Skype, you know, with your psychiatrist back where you're, you know, where they're from. So it's like it has to be paid attention to, because you can't, everything needs to be arranged around how intensive the supports are needed for the student. So again, whether it's starting at a community college or a local university and taking one class, and we always tell people this is not a race, it's a journey. So, you know, people need to really pay attention to that.
Okay, well, we have a few more questions. Do you want me to go there, Eustacia, or do you have something?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, we had some, someone asked about a smart pen. Did any of the students use smart pens in the classroom?
Yes, I have a student that uses them, and he is great with it. And when I was helping him get ready for his final, and we were going over the review questions, he could identify exactly, like I'd say, all right, when did they, you know, such and such with the Cold War? And he found it, and he said, March 31st lecture. And so he could, you know, he could record, you know, he had the recording and all that sort of thing. What that doesn't do, it gets information, but it doesn't, executing is the problem with autism. So somebody can look at the review question, they can have the information, and so he'd say, I've got it. And I'd say, okay, now answer the question. He'd say, I got it. So it would be like, all right, now let's stop now, and let's some of the things you listen to, now you need to tell me 5 important things about what you just listened to. So I mean, that it's still a process. So it's helpful, but it's not the whole thing. And I have a number of students who don't like them at all, because it's too much. It's too much information. Once they're done with class, they've got all this information on the smart pen, and you know, they don't know what to do with it.
Okay. And then a couple of comments. I'll just kind of read what people have written in. Someone talked about a young man that went to college in Chicago and managed to get a degree in video film, but he was unable to have conversations. And just wondered how that could happen. And he took a couple of classes several times but managed to get his degree. He did not have the social expertise. So
I think it's an individual sort of thing, and we always have to be careful about what does the person want. There's a certain amount of reciprocity in social communication that must happen, but I think that we can't impose on people. And for instance, if in his job, maybe conversation isn't required. Now, he might need somebody that's acting as an agent to help him get employed, because that whole interviewing process, he needs that headhunter guy in the Detroit area to then match him up with a computer that would need those sorts of skills. But I think that, yes, that obviously should be a goal, is that there's enough social communication going on that wouldn't be the case. So that's where the mental health factor comes in, and is there depression, and that takes a psychiatrist to do those differential diagnoses. Because if somebody is really happy doing their video editing and they're not depressed, then we have to kind of look and say, well, do they need to be, you know, all chatty, or, you know, is it hurting them in some way? If it's hurting them, obviously, then that becomes a mental health issue as well.
And then a couple more comments from Diana. She's in Idaho, and I think I've mentioned her to you, Sally, at some point.
Oh, yes. Hello, Diana.
So she was saying that Vogue Rehab in Idaho requires students to carry a full load, so that's really hard for students to get financial aid.
No, you know what? We have the same thing in Michigan, and all we do is write a letter saying that this person's in this college supports program, and the full load becomes 6 credits. We've even, people that were qualified for scholarships that were based on a full load, we've gotten that accommodated, and they get the portion of it. They don't get the full scholarship, but they can still get it. So that's an accommodation. That's an accommodation, and it would be illegal for them to say, no, we're not going to do that. And that's what we learned. That's what we learned. So,
what's your thought on having courses that require students to work with those who have ASD as part of the major? So you would have, I mean, any of your students get credit basically for helping as mentors. Our students get paid. I wouldn't necessarily want to make that a requirement. There's a university in my state that for psych majors, if they become roommates with a person on the spectrum, that they get their room and board taken care of, which, you know, I don't even know how that's working out. All our students, we get because of their accommodations, we've gotten them rooms just by themselves. They've wanted rooms by themselves, and they've not had to pay any additional for that. So I guess I'd have a problem with it. You know, my graduate students in the area of autism, I make them put in some hours, 6 hours, looking at interviewing and talking with college students and things like that. But I would kind of worry about mandating it because as being the person in charge, and I've had to, fire a lot of different individuals who seemed like they would be absolutely great. And people say one thing, but they really have to grasp when it's autism. So when the person might say something that would seem insulting to another person, they have to look at it and not personalize things. I mean, so there's a whole lot of power struggles that would be created, I think. I would never want to do that. I would not want to do that in running this program. I'd rather they get paid. So Eustacia, do you talk about any of these things in college with Temple in your book?
No, not a great deal, because Temple has talked about it, and I tried to hold what I wrote in the book down to her young life, which she had not talked about. I'm interested in what I'm hearing, and I do think of moments where she had a struggle with college. And I think what's interesting in her path is that to get into Franklin Pierce, for one thing, and time can be stretched out. It took Temple 6 years to do 4 years of high school. And then to go to Franklin Pierce, Henry Patey, who was head of Hampshire School, knew that Temple couldn't take entrance exams. They were too much of a strain. But he and Dr. Frank DePietro, who was head of Franklin Pierce College, which was only 20 minutes away, were close friends. And they decided to take the chance on Temple,
right.
Which was very nice. I'll forever and ever appreciate their doing that. And that she was accepted pro tem without exam, and she did it very well and graduated with honors 4th in a class of 100.
Wow.
So the kind of work you're doing, Sally, just impresses me so much. I can't think of anything but to heap praise on you for your focus. And I think what I would love to see is what you're doing spread, because essentially what you're doing is you're educating the mainstream at the same time.
Right, and that's the most valuable thing, I think, when our college president, university president, and registrar and board of regents, and they all are going, oh, okay.
That's right. That's right. Again,
raises the bar.
it raises the bar.
For everybody on the spectrum.
For everybody.
Right, right.
And a shared insight.
Right.
Now, Sally, I'm going to just put your picture of your brother up here and wondered if you could talk a little bit about your brother, because he didn't go to college.
No, he did not. He did not. Although my father always had the joke that if we dropped him off at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and picked him up in 4 years, he might have a degree. But no, Tim was not what we would call our high-functioning individual. Tim had straight-out autism and had limited verbal abilities, but learned and understood from the get-go that behavior was communication. And my experience with him, and it's coming up on 5 years that I lost my Tim, and he passed away from a heart attack in July of 5 years ago. So he didn't go to college, but it's what's interesting is you look at the spectrum of autism, and they call it the spectrum of autism for a reason, in that some of the social skills and ways he approaches things are not that different than some of the kids in our program who, might be considered very, very brilliant and things like that. So it's all because of Tim that I'm doing any of this. So
I wanted to make sure people knew that, because at one point you said who have a family member. I thought we really need to let people know.
Yes, right.
Do you want to wrap this up, Eustacia? And then I'm going to introduce Ruth Garfield just for a second, too, because she's on as one of the panelists, finally got on, and she's our executive director. I wanted to meet her. So.
Well, I think we have wrapped it up, rather.
Yeah.
And I feel this is shared insight. And the quote I always like is from a science writer who said that genes are not the implacable little determinists we thought they were. The way in which their promoters turn on and off is dependent on external experience. All that we're talking about today is external experience, and that produces change in us and in our children. And I believe in that with all my heart. And Sally, can't thank you enough. You are eloquent and passionate. What a
Thank you very much.
Conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.